Officer Daniel Hayes prided himself on being a man of the law. 10 years on the force had hardened him, shaped his worldview, and cemented a belief that authority was absolute. He walked the streets of his precinct like a warden, believing that his presence alone was enough to keep the so-called troublemakers in check. It wasn't racism, he told himself. It was law and order. 17-year-old Olivia Carter, however, had done nothing to warrant his attention. An honor student with a bright future ahead. She spent her days buried in textbooks, her nights dreaming of a courtroom. Law fascinated her, justice even more so. She wanted to become a lawyer, not just for herself, but for the people who had never been given a fair chance. That evening, she had only stopped by the bookstore to pick up a new law textbook. But fate had other plans. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, clutching the heavy book to her chest, a patrol car crawled up beside her. She barely noticed at first, lost in thought, until a sharp voice cut through the night air. "Where are you going in such a hurry?" Olivia's step slowed. She turned, brows furrowing. The officer's eyes bore into her, scanning her like she was a suspect rather than a girl heading home. "Excuse me," she asked. "You heard me," Officer Hayes said, his voice laced with suspicion. His gaze flicked to the bag slung over her shoulder. "What's in the bag?" Olivia's spine stiffened. She knew her rights. "It's just a book." "Hand it over." She hesitated. "Am I being detained?" Hayes' face darkened. A teenager questioning him, challenging his authority. His grip tightened on his belt. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." "What?" "No, I didn't do anything." The words barely left her lips before his hands clamped down on her wrists, twisting them with unnecessary force. Pain shot up her arms, her pulse racing. "Let me go," she protested, struggling against his grip. But it was pointless. The cold steel of handcuffs bit into her skin as he shoved her toward the squad car. Around them, people had started to notice. Phones were raised, voices calling out in protest. She didn't do anything. Let her go. Hayes ignored them. People always cried injustice when it suited them. To him, this was simple. Another troublemaker off the streets. He barely registered the anger in the crowd, the way their phones tracked his every move. But he should have, because this time he had picked the wrong girl. The holding cell was cold, the flickering fluorescent light casting eerie shadows against the walls. Olivia sat on the hard bench, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from disbelief. How had this happened? How had she gone from browsing books to being locked in a cell like a common criminal? She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. She had seen this before. Innocent black men and women harassed, brutalized, arrested, names trending for weeks before fading into statistics. Now she was one of them. From the other side of the bars, she heard laughter. Little brat thought she could talk back. Hayes' voice rang out, casual, amused. Olivia's jaw tightened. "Bet she won't be so cocky now," another officer muttered. A pause, then the sound of typing. "Let me run her through the system real quick." Silence. Then, air shifted. The smugness in the room evaporated in an instant. Hayes frowned. "What?" His voice had lost its edge, now clipped and impatient. The other officer didn't answer immediately. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, his face paling as he read the screen. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said it. "You just arrested the daughter of Federal Judge Eleanor Carter." Hayes felt like he had been punched in the gut. His pulse spiked, his mouth went dry. Judge Carter. The Judge Carter. The woman known for holding corrupt cops accountable. The woman who had sent more than a few officers packing, and some straight to prison. And now, her daughter was in a cell under his name. A jolt of panic shot through him. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Olivia sat up as a heavy steel door swung open with a clang. The room, dim and oppressive just seconds ago, seemed to shift as her mother stepped inside. Judge Eleanor Carter didn't just enter the precinct. She commanded it, dressed in a sharp navy suit. Her presence was as unshakable as the rulings that had made her one of the most feared and respected judges in the country. Behind her, the police chief trailed, his face tight, his jaw clenched, his eyes dark with barely contained frustration. Olivia exhaled shakily as her mother's gaze locked onto her. Olivia. Judge Carter's voice was steady, controlled, but beneath it, barely masked fury simmered. Are you okay? Relief flooded Olivia's chest. She gave a small nod. Then her mother turned to Officer Hayes. Officer Hayes, she said, each syllable cutting like steel. Would you care to explain why my daughter is in a jail cell? For the first time that night, Hayes didn't have an answer. The arrogance, the smirk, the condescension, all of it was gone. His lips parted, but nothing came out. He swallowed, searching for words that wouldn't come. She was resisting. She looked suspicious. Judge Carter's eyes narrowed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Suspicious, she repeated, voice like ice. Suspicious how? Hayes opened his mouth, then shut it. He had nothing. The police chief stepped in, his tone cautious. Your Honor, this is a terrible mistake. A mistake? Judge Carter's head tilted slightly. Her voice didn't rise, but somehow it carried the weight of a gavel slamming down. Oh, I assure you this is no mistake. This is a pattern, and I will make sure my daughter is the last victim of it. She turned sharply to the chief. Release her. Now. Keys rattled, the lock clicked, and within seconds, the cell door swung open. Olivia stepped out, chin high. She refused to let Hayes see how shaken she had been. Hayes tried to stammer something. Anything. But the look on Judge Carter's face silenced him before it could begin. Look, I save it, Judge Carter snapped. Because first thing tomorrow, I will be filing a federal case against you and your badge. She took a step closer, lowering her voice to a deadly calm. You might as well turn it in now. Hayes felt the blood drain from his face. He didn't need to be told twice. His career was already over. The next morning, the video of Olivia's wrongful arrest went viral. News outlets were ablaze with headlines. Federal judge's daughter arrested without cause. Corrupt cop faces termination and lawsuit. As Olivia sat beside her mother, watching the coverage, Judge Carter turned to her. I know this was terrifying, she said. But this moment, this is why I do what I do. Olivia met her mother's gaze, determination burning in her chest. And one day, she said, I'll do the same. As Hayes packed up his desk for the last time, he saw his name plastered everywhere. His badge was gone, his reputation destroyed. And the girl he had tried to silence? She would make sure his kind never abused their power again. Justice had been served.